All right, so let me ask one more time just so it's on there. Do I have your permission to record, Professor?
You have my permission to record.
Okay, score. Well, I want to thank everybody for listening in to another session of interviews with well known professors, academics, activists, commentators on independence movements and the topic of political division. Today we are talking with Professor Rob Williams. Professor Williams teaches at Champlain Colleges in Vermont and teaches global studies and digital media communication. He has been a leader with the Vermont Independent Movement and has written and talked extensively about it. Professor, could you introduce yourself, who you are, what's your relation to Vermont, and why are we talking today? So it's exactly how you want it to be, sir.
Sure, Marcus. Thanks for having me on your program. I am Rob Williams. I am the publisher of VermontIndependent.net online, and I have been involved with the Vermont Independence Conversation since 2005, when I co-founded Vermont Commons News Journal, Voices of Independence. As you said, I'm a professor. I'm also a consultant, a musician, a father, a traveler, and a retired yak farmer now. Yak food cart purveyor.
I saw some of the videos. I love it. You are very much, you're not just talking. I mean, you really are growing and eating those yaks.
We are indeed.
So what is the Vermont independence movement, and how did you come to be part of it, Professor?
In 2004, November, Kirkpatrick Sale, author of Human Scale, and his colleague Thomas Naylor, who was the founder of the Second Vermont Republic think tank, Kirkpatrick and Thomas convened what they called a RadCon conference in Middlebury, Vermont, to explore the question, what will we do after the U.S. empire collapses? Mm-hmm. And I attended that November 2004 conference as a disinterested observer. I was there to take notes as a journalist, as a videographer. I did some interviewing of the attendees. And after that weekend at RadCon, I kind of walked away radicalized. I had been... Yeah, I had been scratching my head for several years, looking at the United States, the collapse of the Republic, the rise of the empire, post 9/11 events, both domestically and across the world. Kind of the bankruptcy of our federal elections with electronic voting machines and proprietary for-profit voting software that could be easily hacked by 8-year-olds. And, there's just a long list of things. And I as a citizen of the United States, I was just really bewildered, literally sort of wandering in the wilderness, And that particular conference really gave me a new perspective on decentralism and introduced me to a number of really bright and thoughtful fellow citizens, friends and neighbors, in particular Vermonters, who really knew their stuff and were as concerned as I was about the United States and about kind of the future of human civilization, to put a point on it. So yeah, it was that moment that kind of crystallized in November of 2004 my interest in Vermont independence. And for your listeners, they may recall that was the election that and I use the word election loosely, the Bush Kerry.
Thank you.
Debacle. Yeah.
Thank you for bringing that up. I don't want to digress or divert the topic of today's conversation, but thank you for bringing up that Trump wasn't the first not popularly elected president who got in through a sham election process. We've done this twice in 10 years. Nobody that I know is willing to even bring that up. And I told him my 30,000 votes discounted in Florida. His cousin calls the election. He wasn't popularly elected. And there's this blank stare in people's eyes like, oh, yeah, that's right. So it's not just Trump had a shady election. This is the second time in a decade America's done this. Am I saying anything wrong here?
Yeah. Yeah, the we have what I like to call electile dysfunction, my friend.
And we do look impotent to the world body politic because of that. And yeah, so not to digress, what is the plan for Vermont independence? How do you plan to achieve independence, or what is the thinking, or the game plan, or steps?
Yeah, well, your listeners might be interested in visiting vermontsindependent.net. We do have a document called Plan V, towards a second Vermont Republic, which lays out in great detail in 5,000 words with a sexy cover. It details kind of all the answers to your questions. But your listeners may be interested to know that we are polling at about 21% in favor of a second Vermont Republic and exploring that option, according to a statewide University of Vermont Center for Rural Studies poll, which is probably the most respected polling outfit in Vermont. And but I wouldn't say that we're a movement here. I think it's more of a conversation. And Vermonters tend to be pretty resilient and self-identify as fairly independent to begin with. We also have a pretty strong communitarian streak, sort of a live and let live tolerance, if you will. So I think there's a lot of interest from Vermonters across the political spectrum in the idea of Vermont independence. And your listeners may also wish to know that Vermont is the only state out of 50 that's self-constituted as an independent republic. Vermont was its own country for 14 years, right, with its own constitution from 1777, which was the year after the Declaration of Independence was written, till 1791, when the Bill of Rights and Vermont were added to the U.S. Constitution. So we have a sort of a history here of independence, and I would say that certainly Trump has been good for business, not in the same way that right. Trump has galvanized your movement in CalExit in California, but certainly I think. But we kind of take a more bipartisan critique of the United States as an empire. We're of the mind that it doesn't really matter if Obama or Bush or Trump happens to be in the White House, that the U.S. empire will trundle on and do what it will do. So we've laid out a series of 12, I would say, platform planks to capture Vermont independence for us, and you can read that in the pamphlet.
So America's an empire. People in Vermont have been aware of this since, we're pushing 15 years now, and they're starting to have a conversation about, let's say that empire doesn't run so well. Maybe people in Vermont should be ready to take care of themselves if it comes to. It's not exactly a formalized activity. It's more of a discussion of when the empire collapses, what are we going to do? Is that a fair summary of the Vermont independence movement?
I think so. Yeah, I think it's kind of humming away quietly in the background. I think they're more visible secession movements around the United States. Certainly CalExit out there, what you're working on is, I follow you guys pretty closely on social media and what you're up to. And yeah, you guys have really taken off. I think in Vermont, it's a little different. It's cold and dark and snowy here half the year. And we Vermonters, we love our green mountains and our forests. And we also, we tend to hibernate for for probably 6 months of the year, and this is the best time of the year because we're all out skiing and snowboarding and ice skating, and when we're not doing that, we're like huddled in front of our wood stoves. So
well, let's do just for people following along. If I could take you down a thought road. Let's say tomorrow it gets really bad, worse than anything you've seen, and 95% of people in Vermont, 96% said, we need to secede and become independent within 12 months.
Yeah. Yeah.
What would you do, Professor? What would be the steps? Let's say everybody's ready to do this. We don't want to talk anymore.
Yeah, yeah.
We want to do it. Walk me through this. I'm ignorant on what the steps are. What would you tell Vermonters? Here was step one. Step two.
Yeah, sure. Here's how it would work, and it would take 24 months rather than 12 for reasons I'll explain. So what we're proposing is that we have a citizen legislature that meets at the State House in our capital city, Montpelier, the only capital city in the United States without a McDonald's, by the way. So we would get together.
God.
Yeah, we have 180 elected legislators, 30 senators, and 150 legislators, and we would propose a piece of legislation, a simple referendum, yes or no, shall the state of Vermont become its own republic? If that passed the House and the Senate by a 2/3 majority, we would send it back to the people of Vermont, all 625,000 of us, for a conversation over the summer and the fall during the harvest season, and then we would reassemble the following January and take a second vote just to make sure that everyone had enough time to really think it through. And if it passed by a 2/3 majority, again, yes, we will become our own republic. We would send it on to the governor, and then from there we would contact the White House, the Congress, Supreme Court, and start building embassies in downtown Montpelier for the rest of the world's countries to inhabit, and start acting like an independent republic. So that would be, in a nutshell, the 2-year process. And we think that 2/3 majority is an important, not a simple majority, but a 2/3 majority, because this is it's a big deal. It's a serious bid secession. So we want to make sure Vermonters have a real hard look and conversational opportunity to really discuss and debate that.
So like around 65 to 75%.
Yeah, but I think it's interesting acting through elected representatives. We have a republic in name here now, an indirect democracy. So each of our legislators, all 180 of them, would be acting. They would be voting either based on their conscience or based on the will of their electorate, or both. And that's the vagaries of a representative system. It would be a really, really interesting conversation to have. Now, we've had 3 statewide independence conventions in the State House over the past 15 years, all of them pretty well attended. It is truly the people's house here in Montpelier. You can walk into the State House, you can walk into any legislative meeting. All the doors of all the committees are open, and it's a very small d democratic and transparent governance mechanism that we have, even in this day and age.
Oh, yeah.
We also, many of our towns still vote with what's called a pen and a piece of paper, a paper ballot. You may have heard of those, and we count those ballots at the end of at the end of the day, and by duly elected boards of civil authority in full public view. So we do things the old-fashioned way here in Vermont, and many of us are happy about that and are willing to fight for that, I'd say.
You don't want electronic voting machines with no record that just tell you what the vote is and there's no way to double check it? You don't think that's progress?
Well, yeah, the so-called Help America Vote Act did the opposite, I'm afraid.
Oh,
yeah.
My God.
So,
wow.
I know. It's hard to believe.
Shocking. I remember when they were talking about Russia hacked the election and
oh my gosh,
how bad the Russians are. I'm not going to digress, but just a real quick story. And so I started looking. I go, hacking voting machines. And everybody's going around going, Russia got us, Russia got us. Oh my God, surprise attack, secret sneak attack. Look how sneaky these people are. Okay, I just do a 2-minute Google search, hack voting machine. And there's a video of a guy who built the voting machine testifying to Congress on video in 2004. 2004, 15 years ago, in front of Congress, on video, in front of the whole world, saying, yeah, these things can be easily hacked. Watch out. Do something. So it ain't a surprise attack. They've known for 15 years those things were shoddy, and no one did anything. Not any Democrat,
Yeah.
not any Republican, not
Yeah.
Sanders, not the Green Party. It's when you get attacked, then suddenly somebody wants to do something. Why didn't America address this issue 15 years ago when it was brought to their
Yeah.
attention in the broadest possible format available?
Yeah. Well, I think for the same reason that a lot of other issues go unexplored, they simply are marginalized by the corporate commercial for-profit imperial media, the so-called news media. And yeah, you're right. I mean, I think they have a convention every year in Las Vegas with 8 to 12-year-olds demonstrating how easily hackable these voting machines are. They can do it in minutes.
Yeah. And
Yeah, it's truly astonishing. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me more about Vermonters theoretically decide we want to become independent. They ask their legislator to vote. The legislature does. Then they talk about it. Then they have another vote. And you got, okay, everybody here knows what we're doing. We definitely want to do it. You go to Congress and you have to get permission, I guess, to leave. What is your plan to convince Congress to let you go?
Well, I don't think there isn't a plan for that. I think we'll start acting like an independent republic and begin to govern ourselves as a sovereign nation. The hope is that we plan on peaceably absenting ourselves from the United States, and we'd like to engage the United States and the rest of the world on our own terms rather than terms dictated to us by Wall Street or Silicon Valley or Washington, D.C. And it's anybody's guess how the United States will respond to that. Who knows, where the empire will be at that moment. But all we can do in Vermont is to try and work together to steer our own destiny. And, as we say at VermontIndependent.net, there are plenty of nations, countries around the world, both geographically smaller and demographically smaller than Vermont, that are doing quite well.
Right.
I was just in Switzerland last month for a week and a half on research on yak research, and I'll tell you, if ever there was sort of an interesting model for a decentralist, a successful decentralist nation, certainly we could learn a lot from the Swiss. Thomas Naylor was fond of. May you rest in peace. Thomas Naylor was fond of the comparisons between Switzerland and Vermont, which he called the Switzerland of North America. And certainly there are some similarities, but we could learn a lot. We could learn a lot from the Swiss. Now, you in California, you have a very interesting sort of conundrum because you are, the sixth or the seventh or the eighth largest economy in the world, and you're basically a state which could be divided easily into 5 countries without too much trouble. At least geographically. So, you occupy a very different place in the imperial imagination, shall we say, than Vermont does.
Nice. Okay. You're a professor. You've traveled around the world. You take students to different countries. You teach global studies. And let's say, okay, Vermont, we're not sure we want to secede just yet, but we want to start acting more like a nation. I think that's what you were getting at as part of the plan. What are some of the things that are available now that aren't illegal that a place like Vermont could do to make itself seem more like an independent nation? And I'm directly pulling from Plan V. By the way, for everybody, please check out Plan V. Beautiful cover, easy to read. Oh, it's a gorgeous cover. Hey, I don't hate.
Thank you.
You did well at the game. I'm a little bit jealous. I don't hate. You did well.
I really like the cover.
Hey, coming from CalExit, the Plan V cover looks professional. The plan is detailed but a quick read. So you're not going to be sitting there for hours. I was able to go through it relatively quickly. It uses simple language, but the concepts are high level, which I have to applaud you to take high level concepts and write them in a way that a 15-year-old could grasp.
Oh, thank you.
Good work.
Thank you.
Good work.
Well, yeah, and I will say real quickly, I was kind of modeling the pamphlet after the work of Thomas Paine, who was the great revolutionary pamphleteer. He wrote Common Sense about why the English colonies should secede from the British Empire, and I realized in this crazy digital age of algorithms and filter bubbles and behavioral microtargeting, it would be nice to create something that was printable, easily circulable, and didn't have to rely on any of that. So I tried to boil down the argument into 5,000 words that, yes, that a sixth grader could read. So I'm glad you appreciate all that, Marcus.
Oh yeah, I would tell. It's called Plan V. You can type in Plan V Vermont Independence. It'll come up. Professor Rob Williams. It's there. It's searchable. It takes you 5 seconds on. It's easy to find. But drawing from that document, Professor, what are some of the things that are available now? And you identified them in that book, where a state could do this and they would be on the way to sovereignty.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think the big one, and you and I think have talked a little bit about this. The big one is really creating some kind of public finance mechanism, like a public bank. Some people call it a state bank for Vermont, and we're 10% of the way there. We made a decision with pressure on our state legislature a few years ago to divert 10% of our annual state budget into a nonprofit financial organization, or a couple of organizations, lending organizations within the state. And we've also put some pressure on the state legislature to bring our state assets back from Canada. There's a big corporate bank called TD, Toronto Dominion Bank, TD Bank, in Canada, which was holding the assets and of course charging us. I think it was hundreds of millions of dollars annually in interest payments alone to hold Vermont state assets in trust. And we're trying to relocalize our state finance mechanism. I think that's the biggest single step that Vermont is beginning to take towards Vermont independence. A couple of other things, and I'm just looking at Plan V here. We are decentralizing our electrical and fuel energy grid here in Vermont. So more and more Vermonters are diversifying their energy portfolio, more solar, more small-scale winds, more biomass in the form of efficient wood stoves, pellets, and that sort of thing for heating and electrical generation. And then the third thing would be relocalizing our food supply. So we're really active in Vermont on converting abandoned dairy farms into what we like to call workable landscapes here in Vermont. And we're pushing hard on the cannabis and hemp fronts. Just in the past year alone, hundreds of thousands of acres of new hemp crop have been planted. I'm sure there's a lot of cannabis in the mix there too, although it's not quite legal yet for tax and regulate industry use. But so finance, fuel, and food markets are really kind of the three, kind of a three-legged stool that we're beginning to sort of build towards independence. There are other things as well, but I think finance, fuel, and food are the big ones.
That's good. So the professor's talking about creating a independent energy grid where Vermont people can provide their own energy. They're not dependent on the American grid, provide for their own food, so they're not dependent upon or could be threatened by shipments or lack of access, and their own financial system so that they are not basically manipulated by a bank that's external to Vermont. Let's talk about public banking. Tell
Sure.
You and I are in an elevator. We've never met.
Yeah.
I don't know much about banking. I know my regular banking, and I know something about the government pays taxes. What do you get with a public bank that you don't with the way governments do? Why is a public bank different from what states, governments now?
Yeah. Well, right now, banking is run in the United States as a sort of a debt-driven scarcity model that's really intended to enrich the banks at the expense of everyone else. And what public banking does is it turns money into a private, scarce, for-profit resource. It turns money into a public utility intended to really serve ordinary people, students who need college loans, entrepreneurs who need startup capital, homeowners and business owners who need access to money without having to pay usurious, high rates of interest on that. So, there's a lot of misconceptions about a public bank. People are like, why would you let the state government run the bank? It's like, no. Bankers will run the bank, but the bankers will be working on behalf of ordinary people, the citizens, rather than on behalf of the casino economy that is Wall Street. Right. And the other interesting piece of news, if folks don't know, is that there actually is a successful public bank in the state of North Dakota that has been operating for more than a century, running parallel to the corporate commercial banking system. And not coincidentally, I don't think, the state of North Dakota has one of the lowest rates of debt in the United States, and I think there's a couple of reasons for that. But and it was angry pitchfork wielding farmers who 100 years ago helped generate the political interest in creating the Bank of North Dakota, because they were tired of dealing with Wall Street's shenanigans, shall we say. So public banking not only is viable, you'll find public banking in cities and countries all over the world, but public banking is also already in play in the United States. In fact, we're working on a documentary film called Plan V, and our very first episode, which you can watch on YouTube or Vimeo or at our website, is all about, it's a 12-minute deep dive into public banking, and it's pretty fun. I can send you the link, Marcus, after we're done, if that would be helpful.
Please, we'll send that.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that to you, but yeah, it's a pretty good little film on public banking.
I would recommend everybody to watch that. Public banking is, I'm sure this is not 100% completely accurate, but basically you're creating your national bank, but at the state level. So if we look at North Dakota, every government collects revenues. They collect taxes, sales taxes, income taxes. North Dakota has a bank that's owned by the government of North Dakota, but it's ran by bankers. So right now, Vermont and California collect their state income tax. Let's say it's $100 billion. And then they give it to a private bank to hold for them. But then they have to pay them to basically hold that money for them. So you're paying a bank to hold your tax money. What North Dakota did was say, why don't we have our own bank and we hold our own tax money and pay nobody? And then
that's right.
So you automatically have a savings there because you're not paying a service fee to hold the money. And because it's your bank and you're not guided by profit purely, you can give out low interest loans to things that benefit your economy. Say, building a school, a road, helping that farmer who's going to feed everybody in the top 8th quadrant of your state develop that farm. And you have the ability to set the interest rates rather than, oh, we need to finance a bridge. Well, the banks are only going to give you a loan at this rate, which means it's going to cost so much more money to build that bridge, because not only does you have the cost to build the bridge, you have all the interest on the payments. And so when you have your own state bank, you can control the interest. Therefore, you're not losing money to a predatory bank. You're keeping it here, you're lowering taxes, and you're able to invest your tax money in your economy at rates that are the lowest you could possibly get. Am I misinterpreting this, Professor?
No, that was a fantastic. You've been doing your homework, Marcus.
That
was a fantastic description. Yeah, and I just emailed you the link to the 10-minute episode from the Plan V doc film, and we talk about public banking generally, but we also talk about it in Vermont as well. So, and we lay out seven good reasons why public banks would make a difference in moving towards independence. I know that there are some cities in California, out in your neck of the woods, LA, San Francisco, where there's a vigorous public conversation about public banking right now within the cities, which is interesting. So
Yeah,
that's worth checking out.
we had legislation passed here in California, and I was talking to another colleague of yours over there, John Root Jr., um, and he was explaining you didn't create the bank, you created the law allowing the cities to make the bank. So we are, it's okay to make a bank, and right now we have cities looking into that, and I really hope they do it because world's a huge economy here.
Well, yeah.
We just ran the numbers. I think it was. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but North Dakota is able to have, I don't know, somewhere like $3 to $4 billion in assets and $300 million in liquid capital, and you compare the size of the GDP of North Dakota to Cali, and California is about, I think, roughly 49 times larger. So we're looking at a California public bank with valuation in the order of, I don't know, $13 billion in assets and $2 to $3 billion in liquid capital. That's a lot of cash. That's a lot of cash.
Yeah, California being the size that it is could kick ass on the public banking front. But of course, the challenge is you got to convince a lot more people it's a good idea. But I think starting at the local and the citywide level is the way to go. Now, did you say, Marcus, you have 160,000 people in California who signed a petition for Californian independence? Is that right?
So our follower base is around 150, 160,000. And
that's
people on
follower
Facebook,
base.
on email, and then the other organizations in CalExit. We have filed petitions and gotten signatures. We pulled those before the deadline because if you don't qualify for the deadline, then everybody goes, well, how many signatures did you get? And if you're under the amount, then they just go, ha, 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 you didn't get the signatures. The signature amount is like 500,000 to 700,000. So it just doesn't make any sense for you to announce how many signatures you got unless you qualify, because they're not going to give you a fair report. They're not going to go, well, we're close. It's just, it's kind of a California thing we do. Who filed initiatives, who passed, who didn't.
And where are you based in California?
I'm in Fresno, in the center.
Oh, you're in Fresno?
Yes, the inland part where people say they love America and don't like how the coastal cities live. And I got to tell you, that ain't true, because I live here. I'm born and raised here. And the conservatives are leaving. They are packing up and going to Nevada. And this place is turning. They are, and the interior of California.
Lower property taxes, lower cost of living, because everybody's, the gambling industry covers it also. That's fascinating.
Yes, and they don't like the values. They want to go someplace with conservative values, so they move out there. And then they're told by the people who live there, "You're not a conservative, you're a liberal." And they go, "No, I'm a conservative. I'm a Republican from California." And they go, "Yeah, that means a liberal out here in Arizona." So it's
that's funny.
It's a very silly story of people who can't stand our values, get out, and then are too damn liberal at the conservative places they go to, and that leads to, just type in "Don't California my Texas," and you'll see lots of that. LA Times just had an article about people in Idaho saying, "Get the hell out," because Californians move and they change the voting patterns. And then people there don't like that. And I go, hey, that's because California has a separate culture than American culture, and constant data points providing that. But let's get back to, you've been studying independence. You traveled. If somebody was interested in becoming independent, you got 3 minutes, same elevator, traveled back to this elevator. Hey, I want to start independence in South Carolina. What would you tell them? How to reach out to their people, how to get this conversation started? What should a state do, think, feel? What are the initial steps to get a conversation started?
Yeah. Well, that is the $1 million question, isn't it? I mean, I can. What we have done is over the past 15 years is to really provide a number of channels and platforms to try and promote conversation about secession and independence. We've conducted statewide polls. We have a newspaper. We're all over social media. We're working on a documentary film, which we have screened in various cities and towns, episodes of across Vermont. I think that's the first thing is to try and make secession kind of sexy and attractive idea, and in so doing, clear up some misconceptions about secession, that it's purely a Southern states' rights, slavery, racism sort of thing, which is, an incredibly simplistic and limited, notion of this global constitutional phenomenon that is decentralism. The other thing too, I think, is really create spaces for conversation and public dialogue around this. And then third, I would say, is be honest about what's happening in the United States as a whole in as nonpartisan a way as possible. I think, we're programmed, literally, we're being programmed right now in the digital age for polarization. We're being pushed into tribes by Google and Facebook and all of these social media platforms and, the so-called news channels that really are pushing partisan propaganda mostly, whether you're Rachel Maddow or Sean Hannity, doesn't really matter. So, and I think ordinary citizens at the end of the day have a lot more compassion, empathy, and commonality than they may realize. So it's our job, I think, to try and sort of tease that out and hold space for decentralism and secession. And as I said earlier, I mean, the one thing we know that is true about all empires in world history is that they collapse, and they often collapse with stunning rapidity. So I think there's this assumption that the United States is exceptional, that it's unique, that it will somehow defy the laws of physics and geopolitics, and I don't think that's the case. So I think we are preparing ourselves here in Vermont for that inevitability, and we're tapping into our best Green Mountain political and economic and social and cultural traditions to do that. And again, it's that live and let live tolerance. And it doesn't really matter what you and I agree or disagree on at the end of the day, Marcus. We are neighbors, and we must live side by side in harmony. And if your truck falls into a ditch, even if I violently disagree with you, I'm going to stop and pull you out, because next week is going to be my truck in the ditch, and I'm going to need your help. So that's kind of how we roll up here in Vermont.
That's a nice thing. Okay, well let me ask you some questions. I asked some other people. So recently, I was able to talk to Professor Taplin at the University of Southern California. Professor Taplin wrote an editorial in the LA Times recently where he brought up a point that, and he was basically saying California should act more independent because of this reality. And it's something we've talked about here in the Cal Exit movement for a year. And I wanted to get your opinion on it. It's what I call the Norman Ornstein demographic, analysis. And Norman Ornstein wrote a book in, I think, last year called America After Trump. And he's a demographer, and what he said was this. People talk about a blue wave, but really we're going to a red wave. Because of the Constitution, states get so many electoral college votes, and they get 2 senators guaranteed, baked into the Constitution itself. Because of that, 35 states in the interior of America are, according to the United States Census, going to continue to be more male, white, conservative, rural, devoid of young people, devoid of minorities and immigrants, and that trend is expected to go out to 2045. If we look at that, that's according to the census. I looked at those numbers. That is true. So if we look, so about the time that we have a colony on Mars, Jetsons, spaceship, I'm serious.
Right.
That NASA predicts that
Yeah.
we'll have a civilization on Mars by 2030, 2045. So around the time we have spaceships on Mars flying around in a colony, like Schwarzenegger's movie, um, is this trend will continue far out into the future, where 35 states are male, white, conservative, rural, Fox News viewing, etc. And because it's 35 states, they control the Senate and they have
Mhm.
massive control of the Electoral College. And so, what Norman Ornstein was pointing out is um, you may have more Trumps get elected in the future because it doesn't
Mhm.
matter if someone won the popular vote. These 35 states have so many Electoral College votes combined. And then when you look at the Senate and the fact that the Senate approves the judges in the federal system and the Supreme Court and can block any legislation coming from the House, we're looking at a future where 35 states are able to say, we only want super right, alt right judges on every federal court and the Supreme Court. We only like super extreme presidents, and we're going to block every single progressive law that anyone in the House tries to do while we take away your rights through judicial decisions. And we've had an example of that. Trump got elected, and the Senate approved Kavanaugh, even though a majority of the public did not like that man. So
Right. Right.
let's say America doesn't fall apart. It stays together. Now, I agree with you. I think America as an empire is falling apart. But let's say, for thought exercise, it doesn't. And you,
Yeah, I was
as,
going to say.
yeah,
Right.
for
Yeah.
thought exercise, you as someone is stuck with Vermont in an America that will never allow progressive legislation, that will continue to elect unpopularly elected presidents, that will continue to place horrible federal judges, the extreme, in positions, destroying all your rights slowly through the judicial system, and you can't do anything about it. Thoughts, feelings, Professor?
Well, it's a great thought experiment. I think Vermont's going to be long gone by then. But let's say for the purposes of the thought experiment that Vermont is still connected to the United States. The 12th and last plank on our platform, Plan V, is what we call sanctuary nation. And I'm sure you're familiar with the sanctuary city movement.
Sure.
California has certainly been, very vocal in that department. But I can imagine the Vermont state legislature, because we've already done this here a bit. I can imagine the Vermont state legislature and the governor and our local town select boards and school boards playing the role of sanctuary and nationalists, if you will, within Vermont and exercising our own jurisdiction over particular federal laws we don't like. But I take your larger point. Like, what about the United States as a whole? How do we influence the machinery of government given the demographic challenges you just laid out? It's an interesting question because Vermont is a small rural state. We're probably more progressive than many.
Right.
We are the land of Bernie Sanders, after all.
Right.
But there's a strong, but there is a strong conservative, and I mean conservative in the best sense of the word. There's a strong conservative element in Vermont as well. Fiscal conservatism, a sort of live and let live tolerance, which I briefly described earlier. Let's not, butt our nose into the affairs of other people. Let's not spend money we don't have. Let's not, preach morality to others kind of conservatism that has very much been a part of Vermont for a long time. So, it's a hard question to answer because, Vermont, one other thing, Vermont is becoming more racially, ethnically, culturally diverse.
Right.
People like to sort of, Saturday Night Live did a skit last year on TV where they mocked Vermont as a place where the leaves change color, but the people never do. But the truth is, Vermont is actually becoming a more diverse state. It's way more diverse than it ever has been before, and we actually celebrate that within the Vermont independence conversation. However, I don't know. It's a hard question to answer. How could a small state like Vermont with, kind of this communitarian progressive tendency, exercise, its will in this new demographic. Well, how would you answer that question, Marcus? I'm curious.
Okay, so I got a surprise for you, but can I take a break for 30 seconds? 30 seconds,
Sure.
And I'll be right back.
Oh.
I'll be right back for 30 seconds.
What? Well.
Okay, Professor? Yes, okay. I think, the answer for us, I'll just repeat the conversation I had with Jonathan Taplin from USC, asking the exact same question on Norman Ornstein. That's Norman Ornstein, and his prediction about 35 states having 30% of the population, but running the entire country. So what happened was, what we're concerned about is things like this. Kavanaugh gets in, and there's some southern states that are trying to have a universal concealed carry gun, where you get a permit for concealed carry weapon in Kentucky or Alabama, where they have almost no gun laws. And because you have that, you're free to take that gun into any state. So a crazy person gets a gun and just drives right into Vermont. Doesn't matter what gun laws you have, because the Supreme Court said that's legal. And the Congress can't pass any laws to undo that because the Senate blocks them. So now you have crazy people, hey, I got my permit in Alabama. Yeah, I'm missing half my brain, but they said it's legal. Can't I just take my 6-shooter into Vermont on my hip? Well, theoretically, that could be legal. And you can't do anything about that. I'd like to point out, the Supreme Court has already been backing up Trump on many things liberals don't like to talk about. So when I asked the professor, I go, what happens? We have laws we want, and the Supreme Court says no, the Senate blocks any progressive legislation, then what do you do? And I'll repeat what the professor said, because I really want to get your opinion on this. He goes, and I'm paraphrasing, but this is available at where this conversation is going to be stored, at Marcus Ruiz Evans on YouTube under the playlist Thought Leaders. And so the Professor Taplin interview's there. Professor Rob Williams' interview is going to be there. When I talked to the other professor and I said this scenario to him, he goes like this. Well, I mean, it's not secession. And that's a stupid, crazy idea. And I go, oh, yes, of course, Professor, that's crazy. But what strategy would you suggest? And he goes, well, just have the states not pay federal income tax and basically force the federal government to do whatever policy you want. And you want to be a sanctuary city and the Supreme Court says, no, you can't. You just cut off the money. And then you go to them and go, hey, you're going to make an exception just for California to do whatever policies we want, regardless of what your federal law says or Supreme Court precedents. And if you don't, I'm just going to cut off the money to you. And I repeated back to him what he said. And he goes, yeah, that's the solution, because secession is nutbag insane. But that apparently is a rational strategy. Isn't that a felony to suggest not paying federal income tax? And is it that much more crazy compared to secession? I mean, you tell me.
Yeah.
Am I the crazy one, or is the professor missing something?
It seems like constitutionally speaking, secession is a little bit more, a little less disingenuous, perhaps. You're putting all your cards on the table. I have to say too that your gun example is not a good one for Vermont, because we have the most permissive gun carry laws in the United States.
Okay.
We're a big hunting and hunting and gun culture. I actually have 4 guns upstairs in my gun closet. And I'm not saying that to be critical. I just want to
Sure.
make sure your listeners understand that about Vermont. And it's been an interesting conundrum for Bernie Sanders to wangle, because he knows as a Vermonter that Vermonters are, not only do we love our guns, but we also have a very low record of homicide here because we have aggressive gun safety classes all over the state and all of that. But anyway, but back to your larger question. Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And my feminist friends would jokingly say, "Well, all the old white guys will die out eventually," and maybe, but if not, what's the response constitutionally and in terms of the how power is allocated? So I'll have to think about that some more. Marcus. I don't have any easy answers for you, I'm afraid.
Would you agree that when you're saying secession is nutbag crazy, and then your next statement in the same breath is, I'm just talking about a tax revolt, and we just commit a felony not paying federal income taxes as a way of forcing the federal government to do what we want on a policy-by-policy framework, is America still existing if one state can say, I do whatever I want, I don't care what your laws are, I don't care what your Congress says, and if you don't like it, I make you broke? Is that a functional America, or is that just as crazy an idea as secession?
Yeah. No, I take your point. I'm thinking in terms of the reverse. The federal government has often threatened to withhold money to the states based on state support or lack of support for particular initiatives like the national highway safety speed and things like that. So, and the drinking age, and that sort of thing. So, yeah, and I think a lot of thinkers who are opposed to secession on principle will point to the federal system. The kind of the checks and balances between the federal government and the state governments and local governments as one of the great resilient strengths of the United States. And I don't think they're wrong about that, but I do think that to dismiss secession out of hand seems kind of ridiculous to me. So that's just my opinion.
Next controversial question.
All right.
So,
and just so you know, I have like 5 more minutes, but go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, then I'm going to skip that, and I'm going to go to a question I wanted to ask you. So you are.
Sorry about that. I have to.
Oh no, I get it. You are a professor of digital media communication. You have written the Vermont Independent, and you did a presentation in 2018 on fake news.
Yes.
So we have, for example, I'll just go. Here's a perfect example. So Nigel Farage, who's from Brexit.
Yes.
He flew out here to California and says, I support CalExit. What he was actually doing was trying to split California, but call it CalExit. And then when reporters asked him, didn't you know there's already another CalExit movement? He goes, no, never heard of it. Well, we had been all over the news across the planet, so that was a lie.
Right.
But so he comes here, here's CalExit, secede. Here's this Brexit guy comes here and goes, oh, I'm for CalExit, but what I really mean is split California in two. And then Rachel Maddow goes on TV and says, quote, Nigel Farage has been in California raising money amongst conservatives and Trump supporters in California to support California seceding. March 29th, 2017, Rachel Maddow. Total and complete lie. How do you
I saw that story.
How do you deal with that when well-known reporters don't talk to you, don't check the facts, and print lies that are really damaging? Because our movement is against Trump. And for Rachel Maddow, a well-known liberal, to say, actually, Trump supporters back this, was highly destructive for us, and it was based upon a lie. As a media communication professor, what can one do to get the story straightened out and not have fake news reported on your movement?
Yeah. Well, Rachel Maddow gets paid $7.5 million a year, $30,000 to $40,000 a day by MSNBC to flog lots of untruths. Starting with the RussiaGate nonsense. So
What?
let's start there. But strategically, your question is a good one. Your question is a good one, and we too in Vermont have been subject to national media misrepresentation. And what we have done is to tell the truth as squarely as we can on all of our platforms, and also invite the untruth tellers, shall we call them, the untruth tellers to free and fair public debate. And we've managed to silence anonymous bloggers within Vermont who have taken pot shots at us over the years, simply by taking the high road and saying, look, you've misrepresented us. You're spreading lies and falsehoods. We're happy to sit down with you anytime, any place, under any free and fair, public, transparent circumstances, and have the conversation with you about what we're up to, and share and answer any questions you wish. And if you keep putting that particular message out and following it up, that's the best you can do. Rachel Maddow has a pretty big platform, obviously. I also think that this whole RussiaGate stuff, and now this Ukraine-Gate stuff, I think has discredited MSNBC ultimately. And I don't say that as a Trump supporter. Obviously, I simply say it as someone interested in the truth.
Right.
And I'm not surprised. I remember when I saw Maddow do that to you guys. I think it was on Facebook. I watched you guys kind of cover that. And it was like so typical of not just Maddow, but just the kind of the corporate commercial so-called news establishment. Doesn't matter if it's Fox or MSNBC. They're not interested in telling the full story, mostly. But if you can get them interested in telling the whole story. Speaking of which, are you familiar with the Jimmy Dore show?
Yes.
What do you think of Jimmy Dore?
I'm not going to give him a blank endorsement, but I am very impressed that he was the only liberal that I saw saying, I'm a liberal, I hate Trump too, and this is garbage. This didn't happen.
Yeah.
I haven't seen anybody else with the courage to do that.
Yeah, I think he's a very courageous and principled progressive comedian. I learned a lot watching his show, and I know he's based in Pasadena. And I think you guys should get on Jimmy Dore's show.
Yeah,
I'd love to see him covered kind of like that. He would give you a fair shake even if he disagreed with you, I think. Yeah. And he's got huge reach. He's got huge reach right now. And he's a savage critic of Rachel Maddow, as I'm sure you know. So, he's an interesting character, and a fellow Californian.
Okay, well then I'm on it because you're the fourth or third person who's recommended that. So. Oh
yeah. I just think I don't know. It would be curious, given that you're basically neighbors. It'd be interesting to get on with him. I sent him a copy of my new fake news book a couple of weeks ago because he's very interested in so-called fake news and Noam Chomsky the propaganda model, which I teach in all my classes and all that stuff. But yeah, back to your original question. I think you hold the line on the truth as best you can. When you're up against Maddow or any of those national performers on the networks. It's challenging. I get it.
It's very hard to fight back against somebody who won't allow you on, won't interview you, just says something, and all of their followers and base never question anything they ever mention. It's just accepted as the truth.
Well, living in the land of Bernie Sanders, I worked with Bernie on some stuff, and I don't agree with the Sanders campaign on everything, but watching the national news Bernie blackout, so interesting.
Yep.
It's like, wow.
Yep.
Pretty wild to watch.
So we don't exactly have a fair, free media in America, Professor?
Oh, gosh, no.
Whoa. And
that's why we start our own platforms, Mark.
Huh. And just to be clear, the right is not the only group making fake news. Am I saying that accurately?
Yeah. Fake news is rampant. Yeah, fake news is essentially refers to propaganda. The one-sided promotion of strategic information, and no corporate commercial news channel, Fox or has a monopoly on that. It's unfortunately in this polarized partisan world, there's a lot of propaganda and not a whole lot of news going on at the national level, I'm afraid.
Well, you heard it first. Professor Ron Williams out of Vermont Independent. Check out 2VR or Second Vermont Republic or Vermont Independence. Any last-minute websites you like to plug?
Yeah, I think VermontIndependent.net is really the go-to kind of the clearinghouse. We've got T-shirts, we got passports, we got pins, we've got hats, we've got all kinds of merch, plus even better, the pamphlet, Plan B, documentary film in the works. We're publishing new content every week. It's been really great to talk with you, Marcus. I've been watching you and your work in California from afar, and really impressed with how hard you guys are working on your Cal Exit campaign, and I'd love to do this again real soon in 2020.
Thank you, Professor. I'll send a copy to you real soon.
Sounds great. Thanks, Marcus. Have a good holiday, and let's talk in the new year.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye.
Free Vermont.